I'm sitting here in my small apartment in Ohio, looking at the graduation photos scattered across my kitchen table, and I can't stop the tears from falling. Not tears of sadness, but of pure, overwhelming pride, mixed with a secret that's been eating at me for 4 years. My son Marcus graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern University last month, and he has no idea that every single dollar of his $200,000 education came from me selling everything I owned. He thinks he got a full scholarship. The truth? I've been living paycheck to paycheck, working double shifts at the diner, sleeping on a mattress I bought at Goodwill, all so he could have the future his father refused to give him. The autumn leaves were just starting to turn that beautiful golden color outside our old house in suburban Cleveland when everything fell apart. I remember the exact moment, October 15th, 2020. Marcus had just gotten his acceptance letter to Northwestern, his dream school. He was 17, brilliant, and so full of hope. His father, my ex-husband David, was supposed to help with college expenses. We'd talked about it during our divorce proceedings. But when the financial aid letter came showing we'd need $50,000 a year, David looked me straight in the eye and said, "That's not my problem anymore, Linda. You wanted the divorce? You figure it out." I felt my world crumble that day, but I couldn't let Marcus see my fear. The way his face lit up when he talked about studying engineering, about changing the world, I couldn't be the one to crush those dreams. That night, as I sat in my kitchen with bills spread everywhere and a calculator that kept showing impossible numbers, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find a way, no matter what it cost me. The house we lived in then was everything I'd worked for during my marriage. A 3-bedroom colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch where Marcus used to sit and read on summer evenings. I'd planted roses along the front walkway, spent weekends painting the kitchen a warm yellow that caught the morning sun just right. It was the kind of home where neighbors borrowed cups of sugar and kids played street hockey until the streetlights came on. I'd imagined growing old there, maybe having grandchildren visit someday. But that October night, staring at those college costs, I realized my house wasn't just my home anymore. It was Marcus's future. Every room, every carefully chosen piece of furniture, every memory embedded in those walls, it all had to be converted into tuition money. I walked through each room that night, touching the doorframe where we'd marked Marcus's height every birthday, running my fingers along the kitchen counter where he'd done homework while I cooked dinner. I was already saying goodbye. The hardest part was keeping my composure around Marcus. He was so excited about Northwestern, constantly researching professors and course catalogs, talking about joining the Engineering Honor Society. I'd listen and nod and ask questions, all while my mind was calculating square footage and mortgage payoffs. When he'd hug me goodnight, I'd hold him a little longer, knowing that soon everything familiar in his world would change, and he couldn't know why. I started making lists that week. What could be sold, what was essential, how to make the transition look natural. My wedding china, gone. The antique dining set my grandmother left me, gone. Even my car would have to be downgraded. Every possession became a line item in Marcus's education budget, but lying in bed those nights, listening to him sleep in the room next door, I felt this fierce determination growing inside me. If selling everything I owned was what it took to give him a chance at the life he deserved, then that's exactly what I'd do. The humiliation started the very next week. I went to David's office downtown. He's a successful lawyer with a corner office overlooking Lake Erie. I swallowed my pride and begged him to reconsider. I'll never forget how his secretary, a young woman barely older than Marcus, looked at me with pity as I sat in that expensive waiting room in my worn Target dress. When David finally saw me, he was cold, dismissive. "Linda, I have a new family now. Sarah's pregnant, and I have responsibilities." The way he said it, like Marcus wasn't his responsibility anymore. Like 18 years of being a father just disappeared with our divorce papers. I walked out of that glass building feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. The October wind off the lake cut right through my thin jacket, and I stood on the sidewalk watching all these successful people in their expensive coats rushing past me. For a moment, I wondered if I was crazy to think I could do this alone. But then I thought about Marcus at home, probably working on his calculus homework at our kitchen table, trusting that somehow everything would work out. That's when I knew I had to become someone I'd never been before. I had to become the kind of mother who moves mountains, even if it meant sacrificing everything I had. The next morning, I started making calls. to real estate agents, to my bank, to anyone who could help me turn my life into cash for my son's future. David's rejection wasn't just about the money, it was about respect, about acknowledging that Marcus was still his son, regardless of our failed marriage. I'd spent 2 hours in that waiting room, watching lawyers in $1,000 suits stride past, their confidence filling the space like expensive cologne. The receptionist kept apologizing for the delay, offering me coffee in delicate china cups that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. When David finally emerged from his office, he looked annoyed, like I was interrupting something important. His office was everything mine wasn't: floor-to-ceiling windows, leather furniture, diplomas and awards covering the walls. There was a photo of his new wife Sarah on his desk, her hand resting on her barely visible pregnancy bump. No photos of Marcus anywhere. That's when I knew this conversation was already over before it began. "I'm not asking for charity," I told him, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm asking you to help your son achieve his dreams. Northwestern is offering him opportunities we could never have imagined." David barely looked up from his computer screen. He was typing while I spoke, multitasking my son's future like it was just another case file. "Linda, you need to understand something," he said, finally giving me his attention. "When we divorced, we agreed on child support until 18. Marcus is 18 now. Legally, morally, I've fulfilled my obligations." The word morally hit me like a slap. How could he sit there in his expensive suit, in his corner office, and talk about moral obligations while his son's future hung in the balance? I tried a different approach. "Remember when Marcus was 8 and built that robot for the science fair? You were so proud. You said he was going to be an engineer someday, that he had your analytical mind." For just a moment, I saw something flicker in David's eyes. A memory, maybe even regret. But then his phone rang, and he answered it without hesitation. "I'm sorry, Linda, but I have a conference call with Chicago in 5 minutes. My assistant will validate your parking." That was it. 18 years of marriage, 18 years of raising a child together, dismissed with validated parking. I gathered my purse and walked out, my heels clicking on the marble floor like a countdown to everything I'd have to do alone. The elevator ride down felt endless. I stared at my reflection in the polished steel doors, a 42-year-old woman in a discount dress, about to take on an impossible challenge. But as the doors opened to the lobby, I straightened my shoulders. If David thought I'd give up, he didn't know me at all. I was about to show him, and myself, exactly what a mother's love could accomplish. What would you do in my place? Would you have found the strength to keep going when everyone else had given up on your child's dreams? Hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments, because this story is just getting started. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, sleepless nights, and careful lies. I put our house on the market, the 3-bedroom colonial where Marcus had learned to ride his bike in the driveway, where we'd had birthday parties in the backyard. I told him we were downsizing because I wanted something more manageable, not because I needed every penny of equity to pay his tuition. The hardest part was watching him help me pack up his childhood, completely unaware that I was dismantling our life to build his future. I remember the day the house sold, November 15th, 2020. Marcus was at school, and I was alone when the realtor called with the final offer, $180,000 after all the fees and commissions. It wasn't enough for all 4 years, but it was a start. I sat in our empty living room, surrounded by boxes, and cried for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Not just because I was losing my home, but because I realized this was only the beginning of what I'd have to sacrifice. The apartment I found was a tiny 1-bedroom in a complex near the airport. The planes flew overhead every 20 minutes, rattling the windows. I gave Marcus the bedroom and made the living room my space, sleeping on a pull-out couch I bought secondhand. When he asked why I chose this place, I told him the rent was good and it was closer to my work, another lie to add to the growing pile. But seeing him set up his desk by the window, hanging his Northwestern acceptance letter on the wall, made every sacrifice worth it. The financial aid office required so much documentation: bank statements, tax returns, proof of assets. I had to be careful, creative with how I presented our situation. Officially, I was a single mother working at Murphy's Diner, making $28,000 a year. What they didn't see was the $180,000 from the house sale sitting in a separate account, carefully managed to pay tuition while maintaining the illusion that we qualified for need-based aid. The scholarship story I told Marcus wasn't completely false. He did receive some merit aid. I just let him believe it covered everything. Packing up 18 years of memories was like performing surgery on my own heart. Every box I filled contained pieces of the life I'd built, the dreams I'd had for myself. Marcus's baby clothes, carefully preserved in cedar chests. Photo albums documenting every birthday, every Christmas morning, every school play and soccer game. I found his first-grade report card where Mrs. Patterson had written, "Marcus shows exceptional promise in mathematics and science." Even then, at 6 years old, he was destined for greatness. The real estate agent, a woman named Patricia with perfectly styled blonde hair and a BMW, kept pushing me to stage the house better. "Buyers want to see potential," she said, walking through my living room like she was appraising livestock. "Maybe we could rent some furniture, make it look more aspirational." I wanted to tell her that every piece of furniture in that house represented years of saving, of choosing function over beauty, because that's what single mothers do. Instead, I nodded and agreed to her suggestions, even though each staging expense meant less money for Marcus's education. The showing process was torture. Strangers walking through my home, opening closets, commenting on the outdated kitchen cabinets I'd never been able to afford to replace. I'd take Marcus to the library during showings, watching him study for his AP exams while potential buyers decided whether my life's work was worth their investment. He never questioned why we spent so many afternoons at the library. He just assumed I was being considerate to the realtor. When the offer finally came, it was $15,000 below asking price. Patricia advised me to negotiate, but I couldn't afford to wait. Every day that house sat on the market was another day of uncertainty, another night of lying awake, calculating and recalculating tuition payments. I accepted immediately, even though it meant I'd have to find other ways to cover the shortfall. The closing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in November. I took the day off from the diner, telling my manager I had a family emergency. In a way, it was true. I was dismantling my family's foundation to build Marcus's future. The title company office smelled like fresh coffee and copy machine toner. I signed document after document, my hand cramping from the repetitive motion of signing away my security. When it was over, when the keys were handed to the new owners, I sat in my car in the parking lot and called Marcus at school. "Hey, honey, just wanted to hear your voice," I said, trying to keep the emotion out of my tone. He was between classes, distracted, but he told me about his physics test and his plans to study with friends that evening. Normal teenage concerns, beautiful, normal concerns that I was working so hard to preserve. That night, in our new apartment with its thin walls and airplane noise, Marcus helped me unpack boxes. He found an old photo of the three of us, him, me, and David, from a family vacation to Cedar Point when Marcus was 12. "Remember this day?" he asked, smiling at the memory. "Dad was so scared of the roller coasters, but you made him ride every single one." I remembered. I also remembered how David had complained about the cost of the trip, how he'd made me feel guilty for wanting to create memories with our son. "Your dad had his moments," I said carefully, taking the photo and placing it on Marcus's dresser. Even after everything, I wouldn't poison Marcus's memories of his father. That was a burden I'd carry alone, just like everything else. By December, I was working 70-hour weeks. My manager at Murphy's Diner, a kind woman named Rosa, who'd been there for 15 years, let me pick up extra shifts during the holiday rush. The diner sits on Route 20, serving truckers and travelers heading west. The fluorescent lights buzz constantly. The coffee is always too strong, and the smell of grease clings to your clothes for hours after your shift ends. But those extra shifts meant an additional $800 a month, money I desperately needed for Marcus's living expenses at Northwestern. My hands were constantly cracked from washing dishes and wiping down tables. I'd come home at midnight, exhausted, to find Marcus studying at the kitchen table. He'd look up with those bright eyes and tell me about his college prep courses, about his excitement for freshman year. I'd smile and ask about his day, never mentioning that my feet were screaming in my worn-out sneakers or that I'd eaten nothing but leftover pie and coffee for dinner again. The hardest part was Christmas that year. We'd always had big celebrations, a real tree, presents under it, my famous sugar cookies that took 2 days to make. But 2020 was different. I bought a small artificial tree from the dollar store and wrapped a few modest gifts. When Marcus asked if everything was okay, I told him I was trying to be more minimalist, more environmentally conscious. He bought it, even seemed proud of me for being woke about consumption. If only he knew the truth, that every dollar I didn't spend on Christmas was $1 toward his textbooks. But watching him open his acceptance packet again on Christmas morning, seeing him read about orientation and dorm assignments, I felt this fierce pride burning in my chest. I was doing it. Against all odds, against his father's abandonment, against every financial obstacle, I was making his dreams come true, and he would never have to know the cost. Murphy's Diner became my second home, though calling it home was generous. The building was a converted railroad car from the 1940s, all chrome and red vinyl that had seen better decades. The regulars were mostly truckers on long hauls, construction workers grabbing breakfast before dawn, and the occasional family stopping for directions. Rosa had worked there since she was 19, and she knew every customer's order by heart. She also knew struggle when she saw it. "Misha," she said to me one particularly brutal December morning when I'd worked a double shift and was starting a third, "you're going to kill yourself working like this. What's driving you so hard?" I was refilling ketchup bottles, a mindless task that let me think about tuition payments and textbook costs. Rosa was the closest thing I had to a friend those days, but I couldn't tell her the truth. Instead, I gave her the same story I gave everyone: single mom, saving for the future, keeping busy. The customers at Murphy's were mostly kind, but they were also observant. They noticed when I started wearing the same 3 uniforms in rotation because I couldn't afford new ones. They noticed when I stopped eating full meals and survived on coffee and whatever was left on plates. Big Jim, a trucker who came through twice a week, started leaving bigger tips. "For your boy's college fund," he'd say with a wink, not knowing how close to the truth he was. The physical toll was brutal. My feet swelled so badly that I had to soak them in ice water every night. My back ached from lifting heavy trays and bending over tables. I developed a persistent cough from the cigarette smoke that clung to everything in the diner, but I couldn't afford to see a doctor. Every symptom, every ache, every moment of exhaustion was just the price of Marcus's education. The worst shifts were the overnight ones. The diner stayed open 24/7, and the late-night crowd was different, lonelier, more desperate. I'd serve coffee to insomniacs and pie to people running from problems I could only imagine. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the coffee pot and barely recognize myself. My hair was always pulled back in a messy bun. My face looked older, more tired. But then I'd think about Marcus at home, probably asleep with his calculus textbook still open on his chest, and I'd find the strength to keep going. Christmas shopping that year was an exercise in creativity and heartbreak. I had exactly $200 budgeted for gifts, and most of that had to go toward practical things Marcus would need for college. I spent hours at discount stores, comparing prices on everything from desk lamps to winter coats. The Northwestern sweatshirt I bought him cost $45, a fortune in my budget, but worth it to see his face light up when he opened it. I wrapped his gifts in newspaper comics, telling him it was more environmentally friendly than wrapping paper. He loved it, said it was quirky and artistic. If he noticed that there were fewer presents under our tiny artificial tree, he didn't mention it. Instead, he gave me a gift that nearly broke my heart, a framed photo of the two of us from his high school graduation, with an inscription that read, "To the strongest woman I know. Thank you for believing in me." I excused myself to the bathroom and cried for 10 minutes, overwhelmed by the irony. He was thanking me for believing in him, but what he didn't know was that my belief was costing me everything. Every shift at the diner, every sleepless night, every sacrifice I made was an act of faith in his potential. And somehow, that made it all worthwhile. What would you have done differently? Could you have kept such a massive secret from someone you love? Make sure to like this video and tell me in the comments, because the real challenges were just beginning. August 2021 arrived faster than I was ready for. Move-in day at Northwestern was a sweltering Saturday, and I drove Marcus the 4 hours from Cleveland to Evanston in my 2015 Honda Civic with a rattling air conditioner. The campus was beautiful. Gothic stone buildings, perfectly manicured lawns, students and families everywhere with their SUVs packed full of dorm room essentials. I felt so out of place in my discount store clothes, carrying the Target bags that held Marcus's bedding and school supplies. But Marcus was glowing. He kept pointing out buildings, reading from the campus map, talking about his engineering classes. When we got to his dorm, I met his roommate's parents, a surgeon, and a marketing executive from Lake Forest. They were kind, but I could see them taking in my appearance, my car, trying to figure out how I fit into this expensive world. I just smiled and focused on helping Marcus set up his room, hanging his high school graduation photo and the small American flag I'd bought him. The moment I'd been dreading came too soon. Time to say goodbye. Marcus hugged me tight in the parking lot, and I could feel him trembling with excitement and nerves. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered. "I know this scholarship is a blessing, but I also know you've worked so hard to support me. I'm going to make you proud." I held him tighter, fighting back tears, knowing that if he only knew the truth, that there was no scholarship, that I'd sold everything and was working myself to exhaustion, he might not go. He might sacrifice his future to take care of me. "You already make me proud," I told him, and I meant every word. The drive home was the longest 4 hours of my life. I stopped at a rest area outside of Chicago and finally let myself cry. Not from sadness, but from this overwhelming mixture of pride, fear, and love. I'd done it. My son was at his dream school, but I still had 3 more years of tuition ahead of me, and my savings were already running dangerously low. That night, back in my tiny apartment with the planes roaring overhead, I sat down with my calculator and a stack of bills. I needed to find another $150,000 over the next 3 years. The house money would cover sophomore year, but after that, I stared at my reflection in the black window and made another impossible promise to myself. I would find a way. I always did. But I had no idea that the biggest test of my determination was still coming. The drive to Northwestern that August morning started at 5 a.m. I'd loaded my Honda Civic the night before, every inch of space packed with Marcus's belongings. His desk lamp, his engineering textbooks, the comforter set I'd found on clearance at Walmart. The car was so full that I could barely see out the back window, but Marcus didn't complain. He was too excited, too focused on the adventure ahead. We stopped for breakfast at a McDonald's in Indiana, and I watched him eat his Egg McMuffin with the enthusiasm of someone about to start the best chapter of his life. He kept pulling out his phone to show me photos of his dorm room, his class schedule, the campus recreation center. "Mom, look at this engineering lab," he said, scrolling through the Northwestern website. "They have equipment worth millions of dollars. Can you believe I'm going to get to use all of this?" I could believe it because I'd made it possible, but I just smiled and nodded, sipping my coffee and calculating how many hours I'd need to work at Murphy's to afford his textbooks for spring semester. The Northwestern campus was everything I'd imagined and more. Ancient-looking buildings covered in ivy, students walking purposefully with backpacks and coffee cups, parents helping their children move into dormitories that looked like castles. I felt like an imposter in my Target jeans and clearance rack blouse, but Marcus belonged here. That much was obvious from the moment we stepped onto the quad. His dormitory was called Willard Residential College, a Gothic stone building that looked like something from a Harry Potter movie. The lobby was filled with families, mothers in designer clothes directing moving crews, fathers carrying mini fridges and expensive computers. I carried Marcus's belongings in reused shopping bags and a laundry basket I'd bought at Goodwill, but I held my head high. My son had earned his place here just as much as anyone else's. Marcus's roommate was a boy named Trevor from Lake Forest, Illinois. His parents arrived in a black Escalade with a professional moving service. They were lovely people. Dr. Patricia Chen, a pediatric surgeon, and her husband Michael, who worked in marketing for a Fortune 500 company. They welcomed Marcus warmly, and I could see them trying to place me in their mental catalog of Northwestern parents. I didn't fit any of their usual categories. "Linda works so hard," Marcus told them proudly. "She's been supporting us on her own since my dad left. I'm here on a full scholarship, but she still works extra shifts to make sure I have everything I need." The pride in his voice nearly broke my heart. He was protecting me, spinning our story in a way that preserved my dignity while explaining our obvious financial differences. Dr. Chen smiled at me with genuine warmth. "You must be so proud," she said. "Marcus told Trevor he wants to study biomedical engineering. That's incredibly challenging." I nodded, not trusting my voice. If she only knew that every textbook, every meal plan payment, every dorm fee was coming directly from my diner wages and the sale of everything I'd ever owned. Setting up Marcus's side of the room was bittersweet. I hung his high school graduation photo on the wall, arranged his textbooks on the desk, made his bed with the sheets I'd bought on sale at Kmart, Trevor's side of the room filled up with expensive electronics, designer bedding, and enough snacks to stock a convenience store. But Marcus didn't seem to notice the disparity. He was too busy absorbing every detail of his new environment. When it was time to leave, Marcus walked me to my car. The parking lot was full of luxury vehicles, BMWs, Mercedes, Lexus SUVs. My little Honda Civic looked like a toy among them, but it had gotten us here safely, and that's all that mattered. Marcus hugged me in the shadow of that beautiful campus, and I memorized everything about that moment, the way he smelled like the laundry detergent from home, the excitement in his voice, the trust in his eyes. "I love you, Mom," he said. "Thank you for everything. I know this scholarship is a miracle, but I also know you've sacrificed so much to get me here. I won't let you down." I held him tight, knowing that he had no idea how much I'd actually sacrificed, and praying he'd never have to find out. The drive back to Cleveland was a blur of tears and determination. I'd done the impossible, gotten my son into his dream school. But as I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex, listening to the planes roar overhead, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. 3 more years of tuition, 3 more years of keeping this secret, 3 more years of working myself to exhaustion to give Marcus the future he deserved. But watching him disappear into that Gothic dormitory, seeing him take his first steps into the life I'd dreamed for him, I knew I'd do it all again. A mother's love doesn't calculate costs. It just finds ways to make the impossible possible. By Marcus's sophomore year, I had perfected the art of financial juggling. The house money was almost gone, and I'd taken on a 3rd job cleaning offices downtown after my diner shifts ended. I'd work at Murphy's from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., grab a quick nap in my car, then clean corporate buildings from 6 p.m. to midnight. My body was breaking down, but Marcus was thriving. His grades were perfect. He joined the Engineering Honor Society, and he called me every Sunday with stories about his professors and projects. He had no idea that each of those phone calls came while I was sitting in some executive's office, emptying trash cans and scrubbing toilets to pay for his meal plan. The breaking point came in March 2023. I was cleaning the law offices of Henderson and Associates, ironically the same building where David worked, though thankfully on a different floor. I'd been fighting a fever for 3 days, but I couldn't afford to miss work. As I was emptying a wastebasket, I collapsed. Just fell right there on the marble floor of some partner's office, surrounded by legal briefs and expensive furniture. The security guard found me an hour later, unconscious and burning up with fever. I woke up in Cleveland General Hospital with pneumonia and severe dehydration. The doctor, a kind woman about my age, told me I'd been working myself to death, literally. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, looking at my chart with concern. "When was the last time you had a full night's sleep? When did you last eat a proper meal?" I couldn't remember. Everything had become about survival, about making it through each day so I could pay Marcus's bills. But here's what the doctor didn't know, what no one knew. Lying in that hospital bed, hooked up to IVs and monitors, all I could think about was Marcus's tuition payment due in 2 weeks. I'd been saving every penny for it, but the hospital bills would wipe out everything. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to tell Marcus the truth. I was going to let him transfer to a state school, get student loans, find his own way. I couldn't sacrifice my life anymore. The universe had other plans. That afternoon, as I was rehearsing how to break Marcus's heart with the truth, my phone rang. It was Patricia, my old real estate agent. "Linda, I know this might sound crazy, but I have a client who's desperate to buy in your old neighborhood. The house next to yours just sold for $320,000. That's $140,000 more than you got 2 years ago. I've been thinking about you, and I have an idea." She explained that her client was a developer who bought houses, renovated them, and flipped them. He was looking for someone with an eye for design and a strong work ethic to manage his projects. The pay was $60,000 a year, plus bonuses for projects completed on time and under budget. It was more money than I'd ever made in my life, and it would mean I could quit the diner and the cleaning jobs. "There's just one thing," Patricia said. "He wants to meet you tomorrow. I know you're in the hospital, but Linda, this could be the answer to your prayers." I looked down at the IV in my arm, thought about Marcus studying for his organic chemistry exam, completely unaware that his mother was falling apart. "Tell him I'll be there," I said. I checked myself out of the hospital against medical advice the next morning. The meeting was at a coffee shop in Shaker Heights, an upscale neighborhood where I'd never imagined working. The developer, a man named Robert Kim, was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and calloused hands that told me he'd worked his way up from nothing, just like I was trying to do. "Patricia tells me you're motivated," he said, studying my resume, "but I have to ask, you've been working 3 jobs. Why? What's driving you so hard?" For a moment, I considered lying again, spinning another story about independence and ambition. But something about Robert's direct gaze made me tell the truth. "My son is at Northwestern," I said. "His father abandoned us, and I'm paying his tuition by myself. I've sold everything I own and worked myself into the hospital, but I'd do it all again to give him this chance." Robert nodded slowly, like he understood something about sacrifice that most people never would. "My parents came here from Korea with nothing," he said. "They worked in a laundromat for 20 years to put me through college. I know what it looks like when someone is willing to do anything for their child's future. The job is yours if you want it." I started the following Monday. The work was challenging but satisfying. Coordinating contractors, selecting materials, managing budgets. For the first time in 3 years, I had weekends off. I could afford groceries without calculating every item. I even bought myself a new pair of work boots, the first new shoes I'd owned since Marcus started college. But the best part was the phone call I made to Marcus that Sunday. "How's everything going, honey?" he asked. And for the first time in years, I could honestly say, "Everything's great, sweetheart. Tell me about your week." I didn't tell him about the job change, didn't explain why I sounded less exhausted. As far as he knew, his scholarship was still covering everything, and his mother was just getting by like always. What I didn't expect was how this new stability would give me the strength to plan something I'd never dared to dream about. Not just surviving Marcus's education, but making sure he graduated debt-free and proud, never knowing the true cost of his dreams. What would you do if you discovered your parent had sacrificed everything for your future without telling you? Hit subscribe and let me know in the comments, because Marcus was about to find out more than I ever intended him to know. The revelation came in the most unexpected way. It was October 2023, Marcus's junior year, and I was finally feeling like I had control over our finances. The construction management job had been a godsend. Steady income, reasonable hours, and even health insurance. I'd been able to build up a small emergency fund and actually sleep through the night without calculating tuition payments. Marcus was excelling in his biomedical engineering program, talking about graduate school and research opportunities. Everything seemed perfect. Then David called. I hadn't heard from him in over 2 years, not since that humiliating meeting in his office. When his name appeared on my phone screen, my first instinct was to ignore it. But something made me answer. "Linda," he said, and I could hear something different in his voice. Uncertainty, maybe even regret. "I need to talk to you about Marcus. Can we meet?" We met at a neutral location, a Starbucks in downtown Cleveland. David looked older, more tired than I remembered. His expensive suit couldn't hide the stress lines around his eyes. "Sarah and I are getting divorced," he said without preamble. "It's been ugly, and during the asset discovery process, some things came to light. Things about Marcus's college expenses." My blood ran cold. What kind of things? My lawyer was reviewing my financial obligations, trying to determine what I might owe in child support or alimony. He pulled Marcus's Northwestern financial aid records as part of the investigation. David paused, studying my face. "Linda, there's no scholarship. There never was. The tuition payments are coming from an account linked to your Social Security number. You've been paying for everything." I felt the world tilt sideways. "How did you get access to those records?" "Marcus is still technically my dependent for tax purposes. My lawyer had legal grounds to request them." David leaned forward, and for the first time in years, I saw something like remorse in his eyes. "Linda, what have you done? How have you been paying $50,000 a year on a diner waitress salary?" The truth came pouring out. The house sale, the multiple jobs, the nights I'd worked until I collapsed. David listened in stunned silence as I described the last 3 years of my life. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Jesus, Linda, I had no idea. I assumed you'd figured out some kind of financial aid package, maybe taken out loans." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from our marriage when he was overwhelmed. "Why didn't you tell me how bad it was?" "You made it clear that Marcus wasn't your problem anymore," I said. surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. I wasn't going to beg twice. David was quiet again, then pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my accountant right now. I'm going to pay you back every penny, plus interest, and I'm covering Marcus's senior year completely." I started to protest, but he held up his hand. "Linda, this isn't charity. This is me finally taking responsibility for my son. I should have been helping all along." But there was a problem. David's lawyer had already sent copies of the financial records to Northwestern's financial aid office as part of his divorce proceedings. The university was now aware that our financial situation had been misrepresented. They wanted to meet with Marcus to discuss his aid package. "They're going to tell him everything," I said, panic rising in my chest. "He's going to find out that there was never a scholarship, that I've been lying to him for 3 years." "Maybe it's time he knew the truth," David said gently. "Linda, what you've done is incredible. Any son would be proud to have a mother who sacrificed so much for his future. But I wasn't ready. I'd built this elaborate fiction to protect Marcus from feeling guilty, from feeling like a burden. Now it was all going to come crashing down, and I had no idea how he'd react." The call from Marcus came that evening. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something. The financial aid office wants to meet with me tomorrow about some discrepancies in my records. They're saying there might be issues with my scholarship." His voice was confused, worried. "Do you know anything about this?" I closed my eyes, knowing that tomorrow would change everything between us. "Honey, there are some things we need to discuss. Can you come home this weekend?" "Mom, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "Just come home, sweetheart. We'll figure everything out together." That night, I sat in my apartment preparing for the hardest conversation of my life. How do you tell your child that everything they believed about their education was a lie? How do you explain that their mother had sacrificed everything without making them feel guilty for accepting it? The next morning, Marcus called from the financial aid office. His voice was shaky, confused. "Mom, they're telling me there's no record of any scholarship. They're saying all my tuition payments have come from a private account. They want to know where the money came from." "Tell them your mother will be there this afternoon to explain everything," I said. The drive to Northwestern felt like a funeral procession. I was about to bury the fiction I'd maintained for 3 years and face the consequences. But as I pulled into the campus parking lot, seeing those beautiful Gothic buildings where my son was becoming the man I'd always dreamed he could be, I realized something important. I wasn't ashamed of what I'd done. I was proud. I'd moved mountains for my child, and if that meant facing his anger or disappointment, so be it. The truth was going to set us both free, even if it hurt at first. The meeting in the financial aid office was the longest hour of my life. Marcus sat beside me, his face pale with shock as I explained everything. The house sale, the multiple jobs, the years of sacrifice I'd hidden from him. The financial aid counselor, a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, listened without judgment as I laid out the truth about our finances. "Mrs. Patterson," she said when I finished, "what you've done is remarkable. But we need to address the misrepresentation on Marcus's aid applications. Technically, he received need-based aid under false pretenses. Marcus hadn't said a word during my explanation. He just stared at his hands, processing the magnitude of what I'd hidden from him. When Mrs. Rodriguez finished explaining the university's position, he finally looked up at me. "Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to feel guilty. I didn't want you to sacrifice your dreams to take care of me. But I could have gotten student loans. I could have worked part-time. I could have gone to a state school." Tears were streaming down his face now. "You sold our house. You worked yourself into the hospital. How could you keep this from me?" "Because you deserved this chance," I said, my own tears falling freely now. "Because you're brilliant and talented, and I wasn't going to let money stand between you and your future." The confrontation I'd dreaded for 3 years was finally happening, but not the way I'd imagined. Marcus wasn't angry. He was heartbroken. "Mom, I would never have asked you to sacrifice everything for me. Never." "You didn't ask," I said. "I chose. And I'd choose it again, every single time." Mrs. Rodriguez cleared her throat gently. "I think we need to focus on moving forward. Marcus, your academic record is exemplary. The university isn't going to penalize you for your mother's creative financial management. But we do need to restructure your aid package for senior year based on accurate information." That's when David's intervention became crucial. He'd already spoken with the financial aid office, explaining his willingness to cover all remaining expenses and reimburse the university for any aid Marcus had received inappropriately. His lawyer had structured it as back child support, making it legally clean. But the real reckoning happened that evening in Marcus's dorm room. We sat on his narrow bed, surrounded by the textbooks and projects that represented 3 years of hidden sacrifice. Marcus kept shaking his head, like he couldn't process the reality of what I'd done. "The apartment near the airport," he said suddenly. "That's why we moved there. It wasn't about being closer to your work. The rent was cheaper. I needed every penny for your tuition. And Christmas that year, when we had the tiny tree and you said you were being environmentally conscious, I had $200 for gifts. Most of it went to your Northwestern sweatshirt." Each revelation hit him like a physical blow. "Mom, how many meals did you skip to pay for my meal plan? How many nights did you work when you should have been sleeping?" "It doesn't matter now," I said. "You're going to graduate in 6 months. You're going to have a degree from one of the best engineering programs in the country. That's all that matters." "It's not all that matters." Marcus stood up, pacing the small room. "You matter. Your health matters. Your happiness matters." He stopped in front of me, his eyes blazing with emotion. "I'm transferring to Cleveland State. I'm getting a job. I'm going to pay you back every penny." "You absolutely are not," I said firmly. "Marcus, you have 6 months left. 6 months until you graduate debt-free from Northwestern University. I didn't sacrifice everything I had so you could throw it away now." "But Mom!" "No buts. You're going to finish your degree. You're going to walk across that graduation stage, and you're going to build the career you've dreamed of. That's how you honor what I've done, by succeeding." We talked until dawn, working through 3 years of hidden truth. Marcus cried. I cried. And slowly, we began to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of honesty instead of protective lies. He made me promise never to sacrifice my own well-being for him again. I made him promise to finish his degree and pursue his dreams without guilt. The next few months were different between us. Marcus called more often, asked more questions about my life, insisted on knowing details about my job and my health. He'd grown up overnight, forced to confront the reality of what his education had cost, but he also threw himself into his studies with renewed purpose, determined to make every sacrifice worthwhile. His senior project was a biomedical device designed to help elderly patients monitor their health at home. When he presented it to his professors, he dedicated it to my mother, who taught me that love is measured not in words, but in the sacrifices we're willing to make for each other. I sat in the back of that lecture hall, watching my son present his work to a room full of professors and industry professionals, and felt a pride so fierce it took my breath away. This brilliant, compassionate young man was the result of every sleepless night, every double shift, every sacrifice I'd made. And finally, he knew the truth about the price of his dreams. What would you have done in Marcus's place? Would you have been able to accept such a sacrifice, or would guilt have driven you to give up your dreams? Subscribe and tell me in the comments, because the biggest surprise was still coming. Graduation day arrived on a perfect May morning in 2024. The Northwestern campus was alive with families, photographers, and the excitement of new beginnings. I stood in the crowd of parents, wearing a new dress I'd bought specifically for this occasion. The first new dress I'd purchased in 4 years. Marcus had insisted on paying for it with money from his part-time research assistant job, his small way of beginning to give back. David was there too, with his new girlfriend, a kind woman named Jennifer who worked as a teacher. The divorce had been finalized, and he'd kept his promise about paying me back. More importantly, he'd started building a real relationship with Marcus, one based on honesty and mutual respect rather than obligation. When Marcus's name was called, when he walked across that stage to receive his Bachelor of Science in Biomedical Engineering, summa cum laude, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete, overwhelming vindication. Every sacrifice had been worth it. Every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every moment of exhaustion had led to this perfect moment. But the real surprise came during the reception afterward. Marcus had asked me to meet him by the engineering building, saying he had something special to show me. When I arrived, I found him standing with Dr. Patricia Chen, Trevor's mother, the pediatric surgeon I'd met on move-in day 4 years earlier. "Mrs. Patterson," Dr. Chen said, embracing me warmly, "Marcus has told me everything. What you did for your son is extraordinary." She paused, smiling. I have a proposition for you. Dr. Chen explained that she was opening a new medical device company, focused on developing the kind of technology Marcus had worked on for his senior project. She needed someone to manage operations, someone with construction management experience, someone who understood budgets and timelines, someone who had proven they could make impossible things happen. The salary is $85,000 to start, plus equity in the company, she said. But more than that, you'd be working with your son. Marcus is going to be our lead engineer while he pursues his master's degree part-time. We want you both. I looked at Marcus, who was grinning like he just pulled off the greatest surprise in history. Mom, remember when you used to say that everything happens for a reason? Maybe all of this, the sacrifice, the struggle, even Dad leaving, maybe it was all leading to this moment. The company, MedTech Solutions, launched 6 months later. Marcus and I worked side by side, developing devices that would help elderly patients live independently longer. It was meaningful work, profitable work, and it allowed us to build a new relationship based on partnership rather than protection. 2 years later, when the company went public, Marcus and I were both millionaires on paper, but the real wealth was in what we'd learned about each other, about the power of sacrifice and the strength that comes from facing truth together. Marcus bought me a house, not as grand as the one I'd sold, but perfect for this new chapter of our lives. On the day I moved in, he handed me a framed photo from his Northwestern graduation. In the picture, we're both crying and laughing, holding each other tight in front of that Gothic campus that had cost us everything and given us even more in return. The inscription he'd written read, "To Mom, thank you for teaching me that love isn't about what we say, but what we're willing to sacrifice. Your secret is safe, but your love will never be hidden again." I keep that photo on my mantle now, next to Marcus's diploma and the first patent we received together for our medical device. Sometimes I look at it and remember the woman who sold everything she owned to give her son a chance at his dreams. I'm proud of her. I'm proud of what she was willing to do, what she was willing to sacrifice, what she was willing to risk. But I'm even prouder of the woman I became after the truth came out. Not just Marcus's protector, but his partner. Not just his mother, but his friend. Not just someone who sacrificed for his dreams, but someone who learned to dream alongside him. The secret I kept for 4 years nearly destroyed me, but the truth set us both free. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm working on a new project or planning for the future, I think about all the mothers out there making impossible sacrifices for their children's dreams. I want them to know that love like that doesn't go unnoticed, even when it's hidden. It builds something stronger than money, more valuable than success. It builds the kind of bond that can survive any truth and overcome any obstacle. Marcus calls me every Sunday now, not because he has to, but because he wants to. We talk about work, about his girlfriend Sarah. Yes, he's dating a girl with the same name as his father's ex-wife. Life has a sense of humor, about the future we're building together. And sometimes, when he thanks me for what I did, I remind him that the greatest gift he ever gave me wasn't his success. It was letting me be the mother I needed to be, even when he didn't know I was doing it. That's the thing about unconditional love. It doesn't calculate costs or count sacrifices. It just finds a way to make the impossible possible. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one secret at a time, until the truth finally sets everyone free. The end.